Hello everybody, getting back into this today. So I did some video editing the other day and I spent a lot of this morning sort of digging into the values because I've played a lot of Valheim in the past basically since they updated the food system. I played pretty hard for about 2 weeks before Hearth and Home, and I've played extremely hard after Hearth and Home. And I wanted to give the food system some time to sort of bake into my brain, see how I felt about it. And ultimately, I started saying, all right, I don't dislike the new food system. Systemically, I think it's a good idea. You know, from a game mechanics perspective, I think it's a good idea. But something was just kind of off about it. And I went, all right, you know what? Let's do this the right way. I've done game design before. I've done world building before. I've done no small amount of coding a while ago, but I understand the logic gates behind it, the complexities. So response was, let's actually go and dig into this. To that end, that meant I had to go and build a system. And this is why I've spent my entire day building this nonsense. So I'm probably going to wind up loading this to YouTube later, but let me just bring this in here. We're just going to zoom in on this because I realized what I needed to do was create a simple system to figure out what is the weight or the score value of food here. And I created an arbitrary score system based on the one consistent factor in the game, which is biomes. So starting biome has a value of 1, advanced biome that we have currently populated. Again, Valheim is an early access game. We haven't seen everything yet, but 1 to 5 giving coastal ocean value of 1, deep water a value of 3. This being, of course, for fishing and for serpents. A few adjustments there otherwise, but pretty much food only came in 3 groups: foraged foods, farmed foods, and hunted foods. The only real oddballs in this were barley, as barley is the only farmed food that you absolutely must have a separate processing tree for. Meaning if you don't beat the 4th boss, you don't get the artisan table, you can't do anything with barley. You can't build the windmills, you can't build the ovens. It's functionally useless. So we gave barley a +1 on top of its biome weight, giving that a value of 6. So barley's pretty heavy, but it's a late game item, so I don't feel bad about that. Fish we gave a +1 because you have to find the trader for it. Otherwise, fish would blow the complexity out of the water. Essentially, this is a measurement of how much of a pain in the butt is it to make this food. And it sort of bakes in some value, basing it on the biome, because that also factors in a certain degree of time and other factors as well. Serpents also got an arbitrary value of 3, on top of having a biome value of 3, because serpents are a very uncommon spawn. And you also have to go way out into the water to get them. So I didn't feel too bad about giving them the heaviest value about what we did. So once you look at that, and we have our listing of what are the values of things in terms of food, we can start looking at actually the food itself. Breaking it down into that foraged, farmed, and hunted, just color coding it, it suddenly makes it a little easier. I didn't factor in multiples of the same item, meaning I'm not going to add 12, or rather I'm not going to add a value of 6 for every instance of barley. That just adds complexity. The goal was simple, quick, and dirty. What is the complexity value of every food? And what I found was that for the most part, the food system systemically is perfectly fine. Balancing out stamina food and HP food. The challenges became where the specific items in the system were going and the hybrid paradox, which we will absolutely talk about in a little bit. So in terms of the HP food, taking this one at a time, the big thing standout here is 1, deer stew, and 2, the lox pie, because that has a ridiculous complexity rating. So looking at HP food, next, come in the meadow, don't require anything, value of 1. Boar meat, value of 1. Deer meat. Now the way I did this is the first biome that anything is available in is where I set that value. That's why deer have a value of 1, because deer exist in meadow, but carrots have a value of 2. You can't find carrot seeds, so you go into the dark forest. So right here was the first thing that stood out to me, and I went, huh, that's really weird. Why is there this 3-item value, cooked deer meat, blueberries and carrots, providing less hit points, less duration, but a higher complexity score? Hey, Jack, how's it going? I'm just going over some numbers in the Valheim food system here quick. Well, maybe not that quick, but we're going to go through it. And I realized the challenge is that this comes from the Dark Forest. This comes from the Dark Forest. And deer meat exists in 2 biomes, of course, being in meadows and Dark Forest. So you've got an immediate value of 5 on what should be an early game food. So then looking at the one above that, which is boar meat and necktails, these both exist in meadow, and only one of these exists in Dark Forest. So the first thing that comes to mind with the deer stew is, first and foremost, there are a couple of ways to approach this. And the first thing I'm going to say is that I quickly dropped the idea of, we should get rid of deer meat. No, deer meat actually has a purpose in the game, and the game isn't finished. Challenge them. The next idea I had was, all right, well, could deer meat and boar meat be interchangeable? And I said, no, that's a programmatic change. And if any time you suggest a programmatic change, a program designer loses their mind. If my prior statement of remove deer meat would make a game designer lose their mind, making a programmatic change will make a coder lose their mind, because whenever you make a programmatic change, especially to game logic, you switching it from if else to and or logic, that's where you're going to see someone lose their mind, and it'll break 5 other things. So I got rid of that. So approaching this from the perspective of a game designer, the first thing that comes to mind immediately is these two should be swapped. Like, they should be swapped. You should have a boar stew, which is using boar meat, necktails, both meadow items, carrots, 1 item that is quickly picked up and then farmed. Okay, complexity value of 4. We shift this up. That complexity value of 5 for the cooked deer meat winds up below just the straight up wolf meat, which is, of course, a little more dangerous to get, but, you know, it's not so bad. So at that point, you have a fairly complex thing that gives you 45 for 25 versus the wolf meat, which is a very simple thing, which gives you 45 for 20. That seems pretty easy. That's a cut and dry balance. That is not a problem. If you really, really didn't want to move the deer stew out of that position, and you wanted to correct this point system of balance here, remove one of the components. Either remove the carrots or the blueberries. That will immediately remove 2 points off of it from the biome weight. Boom. It's a 3. It is now directly in line with your system. It works perfectly. The other thing that I noticed is that deer meat is underutilized. And this comes into what this list doesn't show, which is context. The underutilization of deer meat, when they split meat up, because it used to be that deer, boars, and wolves all just dropped a singular item value called meat. It was generic meat. Meat, anywhere that a recipe called for meat, you could use meat from any animal you wanted. You know, simple generic meat. Arbitrary item. Splitting this up created a lot of complexity, and this is one of those changes that I've seen happen in game design before. I saw it happen at the company, like the games company I used to work at, where I worked with another individual, and they were convinced that every single thing had to have a unique value and purpose. And it's very at odds with an idea of utility in games, which is to say you want to have a limited number of items that you can add increasingly more complex values. Now, the beauty of Valheim is it's a pretty simple system. There's almost nothing that takes more than 3 items to make. Almost nothing. Look, see, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. The most complex items in the game, all the way up, take 3 items. Which is a fine system to do it. I mean, Ultima Online did it the exact same way, and it was a beautiful system. They only had like 7 or 8 arbitrary items for their alchemy system, and it was very successful. Because when you start making iterative combinations, you have so many combinations you can make. So putting something that has a high complexity, and I say high complexity because it's immediately got 3 items, which for Valheim is a complex item. 3 items is a complex item in Valheim for construction purposes. Putting aside the arbitrary rareness or commonality of the item, that's pretty complex low down. Where I say deer meat is underutilized is because when you look at boar meat, cooked boar meat, cooked deer meat, okay, 1 for 1, fairly approximate. You know, you get a little more hit points out of that. Okay, deer stew, you only get a few more hit points, not much better for it. Mincemeat is boar meat, so now we're still 2 for 2 here. The mincemeat arbitrarily being kind of easier to do, but that's an arbitrary measurement. But then we come up here, and there's boar meat again, which is a very good food in the sausages, and it's high production food too. If you look over to stamina, we jump over here. Nothing in stamina uses beer meat, but there's boar meat again on the turnip stew, also for a pretty high value, you know, mid to late game food. It's not bad. You know, you're going to be using that through the swamp, probably into the plains, until you get some of the better stuff after the 4th boss. This is arbitrarily the majority of the food you're going to eat over your gameplay. And then in balanced food, there's boar meat again, and no deer meat. So deer meat currently is very underutilized. That's point number 1. Putting this overemphasis on boar meat is a problem as well, because here's why. Boars only exist in meadow, which means you have to go back to the starting biome of the game, the lowest, I don't want to say level, but the easiest, the simplest biome of the game, the least threatening biome, and be running around looking for boars. Well, that's a bit challenging. I mean, you don't want to be someone who's gotten through the 4th boss of the game and have to come back and do that, versus, now in theory you might find some foraging, but foraged items, for the most part, when you look at the foraging list, notice how mushrooms, blueberries, and thistles, things you want for a majority of your stuff you're going to be using, especially for meads later on, because these are pulling double duty, are in Dark Forest. Deer also exist in Dark Forest. So you would think for these upper tier recipes, where you're going to be spending the majority of time, where the other things are coming out of advanced positions in this, boar meat doesn't make a lot of sense here on sausages. Boar meat doesn't make a lot of sense for turnip stew either. I mean, you can make an argument for turnip stew for boar meat, because that means it is a very good value for a player who has decided, I'm going to run through the swamp, find some turnips, bring them back, start my farm early. It's a good power gamer move. No question. I think for the more casual gameplay purposes, this means you're putting a lot of emphasis on saying, I have to go back and really farm pigs. Or literally tame pigs and start a pig farm, and now you're adding that time frame into your food production as well. How long does it take for all my pigs to constantly mass produce enough pigs to feed me for the value of time I get for this? If I'm getting 25 minutes a tick for 1 boar meat, and let's say I can successfully harvest 10 boars a day, okay, so that's basically 1 game session's worth of boar meat for this. So if I'm playing for, call it like an hour a day, so that's 1 hour, 2, so like 3.5 hours, 3 hours for the game sessions I play. This is barely sustainable, let alone if you're looking at a large group, where you would need suddenly, if you're playing with 6-7 people on a server, which I do, you would need hundreds of boars a day to make that work. It falls apart quickly, versus just running around shooting deer. So having deer meat in these upper complexities, where you get above that complexity rating of 5, that score of 5, suddenly deer becomes a lot more appealing. So that's the challenge there, is deer in that. I also noticed a similar thing here because of the sausages and black soup, as I was discussing. It's a little weird that you have to go back and farm boar meat to make this work, especially considering blood bags are coming in at a higher score value because all their stuff is coming out of swamp for the most part. You know, you're getting that swamp value, and then honey. So yeah, we're looking at this and saying, nah, the values are in line, but it's a little odd. Otherwise, it's pretty much a straight line. The only thing that's a real standout is that lox pie. The lox pie coming in behind the serpent stew, I don't think is unreasonable, just by virtue of It's forage, it's farming, and it's hunting. This is a balanced item for the ease of which you can make it versus having to run around to find uncommon critters in the ocean at night. No question. Yeah, Zev, I know. I'm talking some game balance here. So when you look at the stamina food tells a similar story, doesn't it? Again, boar meat coming in on turnip stew here, giving us this valuation at 55 for 25. But the muck shake, which requires not a farmable item that you find initially at the swamp and then produce up, you have to go and murder oozes in the swamp. And then add 2 layers of complexity from meadow and from dark forest. So when you look at it, this is a much more complex recipe to do, first and foremost. And that's reflected in the score when you look at the score value of it using our same biome weighting system that we've been talking about. These two should probably get flipped. Right now, it feels like the muck shake should be the one dropping 55 stamina on you. Right? And the turnip stew should be the one giving you 50 stamina. That's an easy, just flip the values. Just flip the values. This one up here, same deal, same story. Right now, this is straight up farming. 10 barley flour makes two loaves of bread. Okay, great. So that means it's five barley flour. Okay. As opposed to having to go foraging, go hunting, and be farming. These values should probably get flipped. That would be my primary recommendation there, is these two values need to be flipped, because when you look at the complexity score of it, if you flip these, suddenly the complexity score, it's almost perfectly linear. And it puts the highest complexity score right at the top where it belongs. There's no weird things like serpents in this. That's fine. Easy. Done. The last place where I want to talk about is the balanced food. And the balanced food right now is suffering from the hybrids paradox. The hybrids paradox is something you see both in nature and in video games all the time. And this is that there is a razor thin margin where you can say that the hybrid, a product of two disparate things, is providing a value as good as either of its original components. Usually what it winds up happening is either the hybrid is so radically better, it completely takes over from the original components. And places you could see this in video games would be, again, referencing Ultima Online, the tank mage. Someone in full plate armor who also is able to cast the biggest spells in the game. Tank mage. Okay, that's broken. A place where this happens in nature, killer bees. Hybridized, Africanized honeybees. They are better equipped to deal with everything than any of their components, and they're taking over. Perfect example. The flip side of that is the hybrid is radically underwhelming. It is not as capable as either of its components, and it's just sort of a bad hodgepodge. And you see that a lot in games which are trying to, quote unquote, strike a balance. If you've ever played any kind of MMO with a hybrid class that is supposed to be some sort of I tank and I use spells, those first 2 years of game development are rough. So the hybrids paradox gets a little strange in Valheim, because what you're looking at is they're trying to say, we want to make a balanced food stuff that gives you a little bit of everything and puts you in here. And noticeably absent from here are deer and lox. Fish is also absent, but I don't know where that would even fit in. Honestly, fish might be a better thing to put in here, because you could put a lower valuation on it, because lox immediately comes in at such a high value of 5, right? More than that, because it would have honey on it as well. In fact, let's just add a line here. We'll just throw this in here. We'll just say fish. And we don't care about the craft station or the health and stamina right now. What we're looking at is terms of arbitrary score. If we're saying this would be doing the same thing of lox plus honey, fish plus honey, and deer plus honey. Now, at this point, we're getting into the realm of hypotheticals, because none of these exist in the game yet. I'm hoping they will, but they don't yet. Right now, when you look at, say, wolf meat, which is our best and currently only really useful balanced food in the game, I did the math down here. If you take cooked wolf meat, it has a value of 45 hit points and 15 stamina. Raw honey, arguably the best early game stamina food that you're going to find easily. Hit points 8, stamina 35. You're kind of, your total values, this would be 53 and 50 if you were to eat both of these in conjunction with one another. And the overall product means you're losing, you know, the top third, you know, 2/5, the top 2/5 value off of that, because obviously you're not going to get full value of the food stuff. Otherwise, it would be, as we stated, too good. And they kind of balance this out a little bit by saying, okay, well, every time you make this, you get 2 of these, though. So it lasts 30 minutes, which is an extremely long duration, which is nice. You get twice as many, so you don't have to make as much. That's pretty nice. But the overall statistical numbers are a little low. It would be nice to see deer occupying this 25-25 position. I feel like there's an argument to be said that locks could be occupying a 35-35 position. I don't know, like locks could probably honestly occupy a 40-40 position. The problem is 40-40 would blow out the actual arbitrary values of what it gives you. Because in terms of raw food, locks meat is giving us what? 50 hit points versus cooked wolf meat, which I think was 45 hit points. It only goes up 5. So you wouldn't be losing as much as you would need to really make it a proper. You would actually gain versus that. If anything, I would say take it off and make this like get the full value of the honey and just make it 40. Like there's nothing that says it has to stay even, is there? So in terms of that, cooked fish again 45. Cooked fish could probably occupy, I would say cooked fish should occupy the same position of 40 and 30, putting fish a little bit below. So above wolf meat, below locks meat. And that wouldn't be a bad balancing act there. So the fact that we're not seeing deer meat used here in balanced food, we're not seeing a lot of other balanced food stuffs, that stands out to me. The fact that the stamina food has a few less options right now, it's got 2 less recipes. And again, early access game, but these 2 here, it really does stand out that those values need to be flipped. Either flipped or boar meat converted over to deer meat for the turnip stew. I think that would be fine. Obviously, the programmatic solution could be that you say it can use boar meat or deer meat, but I don't know that the game is going to support that level of complexity of logic. I haven't looked at their code. I'm not going to look at their code, but the easier solution would be to flip this to deer meat and leave boars in that early game, or alternatively leave that as boar meat and just turn sausages into deer meat. Either way, this again, flip the values on this. These 2 need to change positions. Blood pudding should probably be the top stamina food in the game. Do what it needs to do. Have that extra hit point bump on it as well. Bread dough should be down here. Bread dough is so much less complex to make. There's no reason for bread dough to be the top stamina food in the game right now. There just isn't. Not for the level of complexity it takes to make blood pudding. Hit point food coming back in here. The biggest thing I can say is deer meat needs to go and occupy some of these higher positions from boar meat. I really do think that that would solve so much of the problem. Flipping the deer stew with the mincemeat sauce in terms of its overall valuation. So the deer stew is getting that 45. Keep the hit points on it. Just move deer stew up to this position, move mincemeat down to that position. Easy fix. Sausages, replace that with deer meat so that way deer meat gets better value. Because right now, going back to have to hunt for boars when I'm trying to work on the 4th boss, this is where I think a lot of the frustration is coming from. We're being pigeonholed into saying we're not in regions where we're gonna find boars as natively as we're gonna find deer, because you're gonna run through dark forest and find deer all the time. Looking for boars means you're making the intentional choice to go hunt out meadows and run around looking for boars. So that's kind of where I'm at with this. That's my hypothesis. So in summary, Make deer meat more of a component for the higher level foods, notably the turnip soup and the sausages. Number 2, if possible, either add boars into other biomes or really start making sure that deer meat is being utilized more, because it's a radically underutilized function right now. Balanced food needs a pass. And changing those values on the specific food items that I mentioned, that would really, I think, solve a lot of the frustration factor, because you wouldn't suddenly be feeling this need to go back and revisit things you've already done. So there's my thoughts. That's my